The old diesel engine wasn't broken. It was protecting something Harold never trusted anyone else to find. The chain hoist screamed as the massive diesel engine lurched sideways. Atlas barked once, sharp enough to freeze everyone in place, then clawed at the oil-stained concrete beneath it. Cole dropped to one knee, his fingertips brushing cold steel hidden where no light should have reached. Outside, tires crunched slowly across the gravel, getting closer with every second. What would you do first? The sound came before the dream ended. A pickup truck somewhere across the rest stop slammed its tailgate shut. Bang! Cole Bennett's eyes snapped open before he understood where he was. His right hand was already reaching toward the empty space beside his sleeping bag where a rifle had once rested years ago. His breathing stayed slow, but every muscle tightened. He listened. Wind. A distant diesel engine. One coyote. No footsteps. No voices. No contact. Only after several long seconds did the inside of his old Ford F250 come back into focus. The cracked windshield. The faded blanket covering the passenger seat. The smell of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Atlas lifted his head from the floorboard between the seats without making a sound. The old German shepherd never barked when Cole woke like this. He simply watched him with steady amber eyes, waiting for the moment his partner remembered he wasn't in Afghanistan anymore. Cole rubbed both hands across his face. "Stand down," he whispered. Atlas relaxed again, though one ear remained alert. The dashboard clock glowed 4:17 a.m. Another night. Another hour stolen by ghosts. Cole pushed open the truck door and stepped into the cold Montana air. Frost covered the grass around the highway pullout where he'd parked. The Bitterroot Mountains stretched across the western horizon like dark sleeping giants, their snow-covered peaks barely visible beneath the fading stars. He inhaled deeply. Pine. Wet earth. Cold stone. Nothing smelled like burning diesel fuel. Nothing smelled like explosives. That should have helped. It rarely did. Atlas climbed down beside him, joints stiff with age but movements still deliberate. He circled the truck once, checking the perimeter exactly as he'd done hundreds of times overseas before settling beside Cole's boots. Old habits survived longer than wars. Cole poured the last inch of coffee from a dented thermos into a metal cup. Cold. Bitter. Good enough. He hadn't slept inside a real home in almost 14 months. Construction jobs came and went. Fence repairs. Chainsaw work. Snow removal. Whatever paid enough for fuel and dog food. He always bought Atlas's food before buying his own. That part never required thought. His phone vibrated across the dashboard. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost every unknown number meant another collection agency, another rejection, or someone asking if he was still available for temporary labor. He answered anyway. "This is Cole. Mr. Bennett?" The woman's voice sounded calm and practiced. "My name is Evelyn Pierce. I'm an attorney with Pierce and Hollow Legal Services in Hamilton." Cole waited. "I'm calling regarding the estate of your uncle, Harold Bennett." Silence settled between them. "I don't have an uncle." "You did." Another pause. "He passed away last month." Cole stared toward the mountains. His mother had died before he'd enlisted. His father had disappeared long before that. Any remaining family existed only as names buried somewhere inside old military paperwork. "I think you've got the wrong person." "I'm afraid I don't." Paper shuffled on the other end. "Harold Bennett was your father's older brother. According to his will, he left one property solely to you." Cole let out a dry laugh. "I don't need another bill. It's not debt." "What is it?" "A tool barn." He frowned. "A what?" a former agricultural repair barn on approximately 3 acres outside Bitterroot Valley. She hesitated. I should probably tell you. The structure has been abandoned for years. Cole leaned against the truck. And? The county lists it as unsafe. And? The neighboring ranchers refer to it as the collapsing barn. Atlas slowly looked up. Cole scratched behind the dog's ears. So why leave it to me? I can't answer that. She continued gently. There has been an ongoing purchase offer from Stone Ridge Energy. Their representative has renewed the offer every year for almost a decade. How much? $18,000. That was more money than Cole had seen in years. Enough for an apartment. Enough to replace the truck. Enough to stop wondering where the next tank of gas would come from. You'll need to sign the transfer papers in person. When? Today would be ideal. Cole looked around the empty pullout. Nothing tied him here. Nothing anywhere really did. I'll be there. Hamilton sat quietly beneath the mountains, the same way it had for generations. Pickup trucks outnumbered cars. American flags hung from weathered storefronts. People still looked strangers in the eye. Cole noticed those things automatically. He always noticed exits first, then windows, then hands. Atlas walked close beside him without a leash. Nobody questioned it. The law office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking Main Street. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and old paper. Mrs. Pierce greeted him with a warm handshake that lingered just long enough to communicate respect without pity. She looked briefly toward Atlas. He can stay. Cole nodded. She spread several documents across the conference table. Photographs, tax maps, property records. One faded picture showed a massive wooden barn leaning slightly to one side beneath towering pine trees. Even in the photograph, it looked tired. Mrs. Pierce slid another paper forward. This is the purchase agreement from Stone Ridge Energy. Cole scanned it. $18,000. Simple, clean, immediate payment. Why do they want it? They've never said. She folded her hands. My professional opinion? Cole waited. I would sell. That bad? The roof has partially collapsed. The access road needs repair. The building has no utilities. She offered a sympathetic smile. I'm afraid your uncle didn't leave you a fortune. The office door opened before Cole could answer. A heavy-set man wearing an expensive denim jacket stepped inside without knocking. Silver belt buckle. Polished boots. Confident smile. Afternoon. He removed his hat. Name's Russell Tanner. He extended a hand. I represent Stone Ridge Energy. Cole looked at the offered hand for a second before shaking it. Firm grip. Soft palm. Office man. Not field crew. Russell chuckled. Heard you inherited Harold's old pile of lumber. Cole said nothing. I'll save you the drive. He pointed at the paperwork. Sign it. $18,000 today. You'll be doing yourself a favor. Mrs. Pierce frowned. Mr. Tanner, this meeting is private. Russell ignored her. You know what everybody calls that place? He laughed. The barn waiting to fall. Nobody's touched it in 20 years. Waste of good land. Cole glanced again at the old photograph. Something about it bothered him. The barn looked abandoned, but not neglected. There was a difference. He couldn't explain why. Years of reconnaissance had taught him to trust discomfort, even before understanding it. Russell tapped the contract. No sense hanging on to junk. Cole picked up the pen. Maybe the man was right. Maybe $18,000 was exactly what this forgotten piece of land was worth. Maybe walking away was the smartest decision he'd made since leaving the army. The pen hovered over the signature line. Atlas stood. Without warning, a low growl rolled from deep inside the dog's chest. Not loud, not aggressive, certain. Cole froze. Atlas stepped closer, then gently took hold of the cuff of Cole's jeans with his teeth. Not pulling hard, just enough. The same signal he'd used years ago before hidden danger revealed itself during patrols overseas. Atlas had never done it without reason. Cole slowly lowered the pen. Russell's smile faded. Atlas looked toward the office window. His ears locked forward. His body stiffened. Something outside had caught his attention. Something only he had noticed. Cole followed Atlas's gaze toward the office window. Across Main Street, parked beneath a weathered cottonwood tree, sat a dark gray SUV with heavily tinted windows. The engine wasn't running, yet someone occupied the driver's seat. Cole couldn't make out a face, only the faint outline of a figure sitting perfectly still. Atlas didn't growl again. He simply watched. Cole had learned long ago that silence from a military working dog often meant more than barking ever could. Russell Tanner glanced toward the window, then casually slipped his hands into his pockets. "You don't have forever to think about it," he said. "Offers don't last." Cole set the pen back onto the table. "I haven't seen it yet." Russell forced another smile. "You don't need to." "I do." Mrs. Pierce quietly gathered the unsigned paperwork. "I'll arrange for temporary access to the property," she said. Russell tipped his hat and walked out without another word. As soon as the office door closed, the SUV across the street slowly rolled away. Atlas watched it disappear around the corner. Only then did he relax. The drive south into Bitterroot Valley took nearly an hour. Cole's old truck rattled over cracked pavement before turning onto narrower county roads that wound through endless pine forests. Snow still clung to the shaded hillsides, although spring had already reached the valleys below. Atlas rested his head near the open passenger window, letting cold mountain air carry thousands of scents across his nose. Cole drove mostly in silence. The mountains felt different from Afghanistan. There were no villages hidden behind dusty ridges, no burned vehicles, no distant artillery. Yet every sharp curve instinctively drew his eyes toward the higher ground. Old habits measured every hillside. Where would an ambush come from? Where would you establish observation? Where was the nearest cover? His thoughts answered automatically before he could stop them. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The truck radio remained off. Silence was easier. Eventually, the paved road gave way to gravel. A faded wooden sign leaned crooked beside the entrance. Ridge Creek Road. Several miles later, the forest opened into a broad valley surrounded by towering lodgepole pines. Cole slowed. There it was. The barn stood exactly as it had in the old photograph. Maybe worse. The red paint had almost completely disappeared beneath decades of weather. Sections of the roof sagged under heavy snow damage, and climbing vines had swallowed one side of the outer wall. It should have looked dead. Instead, it looked patient. Atlas climbed from the truck before Cole had even shut off the engine. Rather than sprint toward the building, the old shepherd circled slowly, nose low to the ground. Methodical, purposeful, working. Cole smiled faintly. "You still think you're on duty?" Atlas never looked back. The front gate hung open. Fresh tire tracks cut across the muddy entrance. Cole crouched beside them. Wide tread, heavy truck. Not old. Maybe a day. 2 at most. The mud around the impressions had already begun drying beneath the afternoon sun. Someone had visited recently. He stood. The lawyer had described the property as abandoned. Abandoned places didn't usually receive fresh visitors. Atlas wandered toward the barn but stopped halfway there. He sniffed one patch of earth, then another. His ears twitched. Cole followed. The side entrance bore scrape marks around the lock. Not old damage. Fresh steel against steel. Someone had tried forcing it open. Yet the padlock itself looked almost new. Different color from the weathered hinges. Different manufacturer. Someone had replaced it. Why secure an abandoned building? He glanced toward the surrounding tree line. The valley sat unnaturally quiet. No chainsaws, no ranch equipment, only wind moving through pine branches. His shoulders loosened slightly. No immediate threat. Still, something felt watched. Atlas finally approached the side door. Instead of scratching or pushing against it, he sat beside it and waited. Cole removed the brass key Mrs. Pierce had handed him that morning. It fit. The lock opened with a solid metallic click. Cool air drifted out from inside. It carried scents older than memory. Machine oil, sawdust, grease, dry cedar, not mildew, not rot. The barn smelled cared for. Cole stepped inside. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight that slipped between weathered boards high above. Rows of old farm equipment lined one wall beneath canvas covers. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Every wrench, every hammer, every chisel, hung in perfect order. Nothing matched the collapse outside. Someone had swept the floor. Not yesterday, but certainly not 20 years ago either. His boots left fresh footprints across a thin layer of dust. Atlas moved quietly through the workshop without touching anything. He ignored overturned crates, ignored old tractors, ignored rusted engines. Instead, he stopped near the rear corner of the building. He sniffed once, then lay down, watching. Cole walked slowly through the shop. His fingers brushed across a massive oak workbench polished smooth by decades of use. Tiny scratches covered its surface. Oil stains darkened the grain. Someone had built a lifetime here. His eyes drifted upward. Every tool had its own outline painted onto the wall behind it. Military neat. Every item returned exactly where it belonged. His uncle had not simply repaired machines. He believed in order. Cole found himself unconsciously placing a misplaced screwdriver back inside its faded outline. Only after doing it did he realize why. Routine. Discipline. Things the army had never truly taken from him. Outside, wind rattled loose sheets of metal on the roof. The sudden clang echoed across the empty barn. For one terrible heartbeat. Rotor blades. Dust clouds. LZ secure. Someone shouting over a headset. Cole dropped instinctively behind the heavy workbench before his mind caught up with reality. Silence. Only wind. Only Montana. Atlas walked over without hurry. He gently pressed his shoulder against Cole's arm, grounding him, breathing steadily until Cole's own breathing slowed to match. "I'm all right." His voice sounded unconvinced. Atlas remained beside him anyway. Several minutes passed before Cole stood again. His gaze swept the workshop more carefully now. Every corner, every shadow, every angle. Something was wrong. Not dangerous. Just incomplete. Near the back wall stood a steel storage cabinet coated in dust. Beside it rested several fuel drums. Behind them, a narrow wooden door, almost hidden. Cole hadn't noticed it when he first entered. Atlas had. The shepherd was already sitting beside it, waiting. Cole crossed the room slowly. The door opened inward with a long, tired creak. Inside lay a cramped office no larger than a hunting cabin. A desk, a straight-backed chair, one small window overlooking the valley, and sitting alone against the far wall, a weathered military green steel footlocker. Across its lid, written in fading white paint, were two words. Cole Bennett. Cole stared at them for several seconds without moving. No one had called him by his full name in years. To most people, he was just another veteran looking for odd jobs. Another man sleeping in an old truck. Another face people politely avoided. Yet someone had painted his name on this footlocker long before he had ever driven into Bitterroot Valley. His uncle had been expecting him. Atlas stepped into the small office and sat beside the locker without making a sound. His tail remained still against the worn wooden floor, but his eyes never left Cole. The old steel latches weren't locked. Cole hesitated before lifting them. The hinges groaned softly as the heavy lid rose. Inside, everything had been packed with extraordinary care. Not money, not gold, not deeds, letters, photographs, military newspaper clippings, bundles of neatly tied notebooks. On top rested a single cream-colored envelope. Across the front, written in careful block letters, were only 2 words, for Cole. His throat tightened. He picked it up slowly. The paper had yellowed with age but remained perfectly dry. Someone had protected it. He looked toward Atlas. "You've been trying to get me here, haven't you?" Atlas blinked once. Cole smiled faintly before breaking the seal. Inside lay several handwritten pages. The ink had faded slightly, but every line remained clear. Cole. If these words have found you, then I've already run out of time. First, I owe you an apology. Not because I stopped loving this family, but because I loved you enough to stay away. Cole frowned. He continued reading. I watched from farther away than you ever knew. Your graduation from basic training. The newspaper clipping after your second deployment. The photograph of your Green Beret ceremony. You never saw me. That was intentional. Your father made choices I could never change. After he disappeared, I wanted to bring you here. Then your mother became sick. She asked me for one promise. Let Cole grow without becoming part of this fight. I gave her my word. She made me swear. Cole stopped. His fingers tightened around the paper. His mother had never spoken about Bitterroot. Never once. He read on. When she died, I nearly broke that promise. I drove halfway to the city. I parked outside your apartment. I watched you leave for school carrying a backpack far too big for your shoulders. I almost called your name. Instead, I drove home. Not because I didn't love you, because I believed keeping my promise mattered more than easing my own loneliness. Atlas quietly rested his chin on Cole's boot. Cole reached down absent-mindedly, his fingers disappearing into the thick fur around the old shepherd's neck. Outside, wind whispered through the cracks in the barn. The workshop remained perfectly still. The letter continued. Years later, I learned you had enlisted. Part of me hated that decision. Another part understood it completely. Men looking for purpose often mistake war for home. I know because I almost did the same after Vietnam. The words struck harder than Cole expected. No one had ever described it that way. Not therapists, not doctors, not VA counselors. War for home. He stared through the office window toward the mountains. The sentence settled somewhere deep inside him. He kept reading. When you came home, I wanted to help. Then I watched you refuse charity. You worked. You kept standing, even when life knocked you down again. I realized something. You didn't need someone to rescue you. You needed someone to leave you something worth standing up for. That is why this barn is yours. Not because it's valuable, because you are. Cole lowered the pages. His eyes burned. He hadn't cried at military funerals. He hadn't cried when his marriage ended. He hadn't cried sleeping through Montana winters inside his truck. Now tears blurred the ink. Atlas quietly leaned against his leg. The old dog didn't demand attention. He simply stayed, exactly as he always had. Cole laughed once through his nose. You always know. Atlas answered by nudging his hand. Cole unfolded the remaining pages. The handwriting became firmer. Now I need you to understand why people keep trying to buy this property. For almost 12 years, a company called Stone Ridge Energy has returned again and again. Each visit brought a higher offer. Each refusal made them more determined. They don't want this barn. They never did. They want what lies beneath it. Cole's breathing slowed. He read every word carefully now. The mountains around Bitterroot hold one of the cleanest underground water systems left in this region. Most people don't know it exists. I did. Because I spent 30 years studying this valley. The barn stands almost directly above the primary recharge zone. Stone Ridge discovered it years after I did. They told the county they wanted mining access. That was only part of the truth. Water is becoming more valuable than oil. They know it. They believe no one else does. Cole looked around the workshop again. Every shelf, every tool, every notebook. This wasn't simply a mechanic's barn. It had become headquarters for a lonely war. Another paragraph waited below. They offered money, then threats, then lawyers. They hoped I would die before anyone believed me. Perhaps they were right. But they underestimated one thing, you. Not because you're stronger than I was, because you're not fighting alone anymore. Cole swallowed. He looked instinctively toward Atlas. The old shepherd remained beside him, watching, waiting. The final page ended with only a few lines. You will soon discover that everything inside this barn was left exactly where it belongs. Nothing here is accidental. Trust, Atlas. Dogs notice what pride makes men ignore. And remember one thing. If strangers suddenly become interested in worthless places, ask yourself what they already know. Welcome home, Cole. For a long time, neither man nor dog moved. The afternoon light drifted slowly across the dusty office floor. Somewhere outside, a raven called from the treetops. For the first time in years, the silence around Cole no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, as though someone had simply stepped into the next room. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. His ears locked forward. He wasn't looking at the letter anymore. He was staring toward the workshop, toward the rear corner of the barn. Then he stood, walked out of the office, stopped beside one section of the wooden floor, and refused to move. Atlas lowered his nose until it nearly touched the weathered planks. He didn't scratch. He didn't bark. He simply stood there, motionless, as though waiting for Cole to notice something hidden in plain sight. Cole folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. His uncle's final words echoed in his mind. Trust, Atlas. He walked across the workshop, every bootstep thudding softly against the old pine floor. The boards near Atlas looked no different from the rest, gray with age, scarred by decades of boots and machinery. But years of military reconnaissance had taught Cole that no different often meant exactly the opposite. He crouched. The dust between these boards was thinner, not clean, just disturbed. He brushed 2 fingers across one plank and held them to the light streaming through a crack in the wall. Less dust. Recent movement. His eyes shifted to several square-cut nails. Every other nail carried decades of rust. These 4 were newer, not shiny, but younger. Someone had lifted this section before. Atlas looked at him, then back at the floor. I see it. Cole walked to the workbench and selected a narrow pry bar instead of the heavier crowbar hanging beside it. The smaller tool would make less noise. Old habit. Use only the force you need. He slid the flat edge beneath the first plank. The wood resisted, then lifted with a dry groan. Dust drifted into the air. Another board, then another. Beneath them lay not a vault, nor stacks of cash, but a shallow wooden compartment built neatly between the floor joists. Inside rested 4 objects: a rolled topographic map, 3 weathered field notebooks, a brass key attached to a faded leather tag, and a rugged black external hard drive sealed inside a waterproof pouch. Cole stared quietly. No gold. Atlas sniffed the compartment once, then backed away, as if he'd already finished his assignment. Cole smiled. You knew. The dog blinked slowly. The map unfolded across the workbench. It covered nearly the entire Bitterroot Valley. Red pencil lines traced creeks, ridges, and abandoned logging roads. Several locations had been circled. Each carried handwritten notes. Observation point. Spring flow. Well test. Core sample. The handwriting matched the letter. Harold Bennett hadn't been guessing. He had spent years documenting the mountains. Cole opened one notebook. Daily entries filled every page. Weather, water levels, vehicle descriptions, license plate numbers, visitors, even delivery schedules. It looked less like a mechanic's journal and more like surveillance. One entry caught his attention. Stone Ridge Convoy. 3 trucks, entered through Forest Service Road instead of county access. Avoiding attention. Confirmed drilling equipment. Another. Unknown man photographing barn. Parked 412 yards east. Left after 43 minutes. Cole instinctively glanced toward the eastern windows. 400 yards, a comfortable observation distance, exactly where he would have positioned himself if watching this property. He walked outside. The afternoon sun had begun sliding toward the western peaks. Atlas followed close behind. Cole crossed the clearing until he reached the tree line. There. A small rise overlooked the barn. Excellent visibility. Natural cover. He knelt. Pine needles compressed beneath one knee. Something reflected sunlight. A crushed aluminum energy drink can. Modern. Nearby, a cigarette filter, still white beneath the dirt. Someone had occupied this position recently. Atlas sniffed around the base of a fallen log before stopping beside several faint boot impressions. Not ranch boots. The tread belonged to lightweight hiking shoes. Someone who expected to walk quietly. Cole stood. His breathing slowed. He wasn't imagining it. People had been watching this place before. He returned to the workshop before sunset. The hard drive remained unopened. There was no computer. His old truck barely charged a phone. He'd have to find help. He replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, except for the drive and the brass key. Those stayed in his backpack. Outside, darkness settled quickly across the valley. He gathered fallen branches and built a small fire ring 50 feet from the barn, rather than inside it. Firelight drew attention. Distance gave options. Atlas lay facing the access road instead of the flames, always watching. Cole heated a can of beef stew over the fire. Halfway through dinner, he froze. Crunch, gravel, far away, vehicle, not 1, 2. Atlas lifted his head before the sound reached full volume. No barking, only stillness. Headlights appeared between the trees, then disappeared. The vehicles stopped without entering the property. Cole immediately kicked dirt over the fire until only faint embers remained. Darkness swallowed the clearing. He motioned once with 2 fingers. Atlas moved silently beside him. Together they slipped behind the barn instead of retreating inside. Cole crouched beneath the shadow of the rear wall. Every instinct returned. Observe. Don't silhouette yourself, control breathing. Wait. Car doors opened somewhere beyond the trees. Voices, too distant to understand. Flashlights never appeared. Whoever they were, they already knew where the barn stood. They didn't need light. Several minutes passed. Then engines started again. The vehicles drove away. Cole remained perfectly still for another full minute. Never chase. Never assume. Only after the sound completely disappeared did he straighten. Atlas suddenly turned toward the western side of the workshop. His ears stood erect. A low growl vibrated deep inside his chest, not toward the road, toward the barn itself. Cole slowly reached for the flashlight hanging from his belt. A faint metallic click echoed from somewhere inside the workshop. Someone else was already in the building. Cole didn't reach for the flashlight. Light announced your position. Darkness concealed it. Instead, he rested one hand on Atlas's shoulder. The old shepherd understood immediately, lowering his body until his chest nearly touched the ground. Together they moved along the outside wall, each step placed carefully on packed earth instead of loose gravel. Years had passed since Cole's last patrol in Afghanistan, but the rhythm returned without thought. Slow, quiet. Patient. Another metallic click echoed from inside. Not random. A drawer or a tool. Someone was searching. Cole stopped beside the side entrance. The door stood exactly where he'd left it, slightly open, 2 inches. He hadn't left it that way. Atlas lifted his nose, drawing in the cold night air. Then he looked toward the office. Not the workshop. The office. Cole gently pushed the door with 2 fingers. It swung inward without a sound. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, laying pale stripes across the floor. Everything appeared untouched. The workbench, the hanging tools, the old tractors. But something was different. One wrench lay on the bench instead of hanging on the wall. Someone had handled it. Cole listened. Nothing. He motioned once. Atlas slipped silently past him, weaving through the machinery without disturbing a single loose bolt. Halfway across the workshop, Atlas froze, his ears locked toward the office. Cole moved to the opposite side, using an old combine harvester as cover. 3 more steps. Then he saw it. A flashlight beam flashed briefly beneath the office door before disappearing. Whoever was inside had heard something. Cole's pulse slowed instead of quickening. Years ago, slowing your heartbeat before entering an unknown room had meant surviving. He stopped beside the doorway. 1 breath. 2. Then he pushed the door open. Empty. The chair sat crooked. The footlocker remained open. 1 notebook lay on the floor. The small office window stood open. Cole crossed to it immediately. Outside, pine branches swayed gently in the wind. Fresh footprints pressed into the damp soil beneath the window. Only 1 person. Running. Fast. Atlas reached the window seconds later. He sniffed once, twice, then looked toward the forest. His muscles tightened. He wanted permission. Cole looked into the darkness. No. Atlas turned back immediately. The old dog obeyed without hesitation. The man already had distance. Night belonged to whoever knew the terrain better. Cole wasn't about to chase a stranger into unfamiliar woods. Instead, he knelt beside the footprints. Size 11. Deep heel strike. Heavy, probably carrying equipment. He followed the tracks only far enough to see where they vanished among hundreds of pine needles. The intruder knew what he was doing. Cole returned to the office. Nothing obvious appeared missing. He checked the backpack, the hard drive. Still there. The brass key. Still there. The map. Still there. Whoever entered hadn't been looking for what Cole had already removed. They had expected to find it inside the compartment beneath the floor. His uncle had hidden the evidence just well enough, but someone else clearly knew it existed. Cole slept inside the barn that night, or tried to. He unrolled his old army sleeping bag beside the workbench instead of the office. From there, he could see every entrance. Atlas chose the front doorway, always between Cole and whatever might come. Around 2 in the morning, the wind slammed one loose sheet of roofing against another. Bang! Cole was already awake before the echo faded. For one fractured heartbeat, he smelled diesel exhaust. Dust. Hot metal. Someone shouting over rotor blades. LZ, move, move! His hands clenched around empty air. Then Atlas quietly nudged his shoulder. The barn returned. Moonlight. Timbers. Silence. Cole exhaled slowly. I'm here. The words were more for himself than the dog. Atlas lay back down. Neither of them slept much after that. Morning arrived wrapped in fog. Mist drifted low across the valley, swallowing fences and trees until only the barn remained visible. Cole spread the notebooks across the workbench. One by one, he began reading. Most entries described rainfall, stream levels, and maintenance records. Then the handwriting changed, more urgent. June 18th. Observed drilling crew 3 ridges west. Equipment disguised as geological survey. No permits posted. July 2nd. County officials dismissed concerns. Stone Ridge representatives attended private meeting afterward. August 11th. Collected additional groundwater samples. Results don't match public reports. They already know. Cole looked toward the map. Several circled locations matched the notebook entries. His uncle hadn't imagined any of this. He had documented it. Carefully. Methodically. Just like intelligence reports. Atlas suddenly stood. Not alarmed. Interested. He walked toward the old rotary telephone mounted on the office wall. The phone had long since been disconnected, or so Cole assumed. Atlas sniffed beneath the wooden shelf where it hung. Cole walked over. Something thin protruded behind the mounting board. A folded business card. He carefully pulled it free. The card read, Grace Holloway. Environmental Attorney, Missoula, Montana. On the back, Harold Bennett had written only one sentence. If anything happens to me, trust Grace. Cole stared at the name. Grace. The attorney Mrs. Pierce had never mentioned. He reached for his phone. 1 bar of service, barely enough. He dialed the number. It rang twice. A woman answered. This is Grace Holloway. Cole glanced around the silent workshop. My name is Cole Bennett. A pause. Then the sound of a chair scraping quickly across a floor. I've been waiting for that call. Another pause. Tell me one thing before you say anything else. Cole frowned. What? Is the hard drive still in your possession? His grip tightened around the backpack. Yes. Grace released a slow breath. Good. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Because if Harold was right, they're already coming for you. The call ended before Cole could ask another question. He lowered the phone slowly. 1 bar of signal disappeared. The screen went dark. Atlas was already standing at the open barn door, staring toward the gravel road that wound through the trees. Cole slipped the phone into his pocket and looked across the workshop. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. He unrolled Harold's topographic map again, marking the locations mentioned in the notebooks beside the notes Grace had confirmed with only a few careful words. Harold hadn't been chasing conspiracy theories. He had been documenting evidence, real evidence. The hard drive suddenly felt heavier inside Cole's backpack. Atlas turned toward him. His ears twitched once. A truck. Far away. Cole couldn't hear it yet. 5 seconds later, the faint rumble drifted through the valley. He almost smiled. "You still hear better than I ever did." Atlas didn't move. The engine grew louder. Not one truck. 2. Cole stepped outside. A pair of late-model pickups rolled slowly through the gate and stopped 20 yards from the barn. Neither carried company logos. 3 men climbed out. Pressed jeans, work boots that had never seen mud, clean jackets despite the dusty road. The oldest smiled before speaking. "Morning." Cole remained where he was. Atlas sat quietly beside his left leg. "We're looking for Cole Bennett. You found him." The man removed a business card from his wallet. "Dale Mercer. No relation. I represent Stone Ridge Energy." Cole didn't take the card. Dale slipped it back into his pocket without offense. "We heard you decided not to sell. I haven't decided anything." "I think you have." The man's smile never reached his eyes. "We'd like another conversation." Cole folded his arms. "I'm listening." Dale looked past him toward the barn. "Our company has expanded operations throughout western Montana. We're prepared to revise our original offer." Cole said nothing. $18,000 was made years ago. Today, we'll offer you $750,000. Even the wind seemed to stop. $750,000. Enough to erase every debt. Enough to buy a home. Enough to leave Montana forever. Cole's face didn't change. Atlas glanced briefly toward him before returning his attention to the strangers. Dale continued. "No inspections, no delays, no lawsuits. You sign today. The money is wired tomorrow." Cole studied the 3 men. Not one looked at him. All 3 kept glancing toward the barn, toward something behind him. Not the land, not the view, the building. His uncle had been right. They wanted what was inside. "I'll pass." The youngest man laughed quietly. "You don't even know what you're turning down." Cole looked directly at him. "I know exactly why you're offering it." Silence. For the first time, Dale's smile faded. "We're trying to help you. I've seen people trying to help before." Cole's voice stayed calm. "They usually wanted something." Dale sighed. "I figured Harold filled your head. He was a stubborn old man. He cost himself a lot of peace." Cole took one slow step forward. "My uncle earned his peace." The conversation ended there. Dale adjusted his jacket. "If you change your mind, don't wait too long." The 3 men climbed back into their trucks. They drove away without another word. Only after the vehicles disappeared beyond the trees did Atlas relax. Cole watched the road another full minute. No dust, no engines. Then he noticed something. Fresh tire tracks. The trucks had stopped directly opposite the front entrance. Perfect angle. Perfect distance. Someone had photographed the barn while the others distracted him. He walked to the spot. Small fragments of black plastic lay beside the gravel. A broken camera lens cover. He picked it up. Atlas sniffed around the tire marks before looking toward the tallest pine overlooking the clearing. Cole followed his gaze. Halfway up the trunk, almost hidden among the branches, sunlight reflected from something no larger than a thumb. Glass. He raised his binoculars from the truck. A trail camera. Not his. Bolted high into the tree. Facing the barn. Watching every vehicle. Every visitor. Every movement. He climbed carefully. removed the camera, and dropped back to the ground. The memory card was missing. Someone had been collecting footage for weeks, maybe months. Atlas suddenly stiffened again. Not toward the road, toward the woods behind them. A single crow burst from the trees, then another. Something large moved through the underbrush. Cole waited. Nothing emerged. Only silence. Too much silence. Grace Holloway arrived just before sunset. Her silver SUV carried a layer of highway dust from Missoula. She stepped out carrying a weatherproof laptop case instead of a briefcase. Mid-30s. Practical boots. No jewelry except a plain wedding band worn on a chain around her neck instead of her finger. She shook Cole's hand firmly. "You look exactly like Harold described. You knew him well? For 15 years. She looked toward the barn. "He was one of the most stubborn men I've ever met." Cole almost laughed. "So everyone keeps saying." Inside the workshop, Grace connected the rugged hard drive to an encrypted laptop. The screen remained black. Then a password request appeared. She frowned. "I was afraid of this." Cole reached into the envelope containing Harold's letter. One sentence suddenly came back to him. "Your mother's birthday was always the safest place to hide a key." He typed the date. The drive unlocked. Hundreds of folders appeared. Maps, water analysis, geological reports, survey photographs, emails, meeting recordings. Grace stopped breathing for a second. My God. She opened one report after another. Cross-sections of underground aquifers stretched beneath the Bitterroot Valley, like blue rivers hidden inside stone. Core samples confirmed astonishing groundwater reserves. Another folder contained environmental impact studies, each stamped rejected. A final folder held internal company correspondence. Stone Ridge executives discussing acquisition strategies. Several pages mentioned Harold Bennett by name. One sentence froze Grace. "Secure parcel H-17 before state review. Owner remains primary obstacle." She leaned back slowly. They knew exactly what was under this valley. Cole looked toward the mountains outside. So Harold wasn't protecting a barn. Grace met his eyes. No. He was protecting every ranch, every well, every family that drinks from this watershed. Before either of them could say another word, Atlas exploded into motion. He lunged toward the front entrance with a deep, warning bark, unlike anything Cole had heard since Afghanistan. A split second later, headlights burst through the trees, straight toward the barn. Cole didn't hesitate. "Grace, kill the screen." She snapped the laptop shut and slipped it into her case without asking why. Atlas was already moving, not toward the road, toward Cole. The old shepherd bumped hard against his thigh, urging him away from the wide front entrance. Years ago, during a night patrol outside Kandahar, Atlas had done the exact same thing moments before an explosion tore through a Mutswad wall 20 yards ahead. Cole trusted that instinct more than his own. Back door. The three of them slipped through the narrow side exit just as the pickup truck roared into the clearing. Its headlights flooded the front of the barn with harsh white light. The engine idled. No one got out. Whoever was inside wanted them to know they were there. Cole crouched behind a stack of split firewood, studying the scene through a narrow gap. "Why aren't they moving?" Grace whispered. "They're waiting. For what? For us to make the first mistake." Another pair of headlights appeared beyond the trees. Then another. 3 vehicles, different directions. The barn was surrounded without a single shouted threat. Professional. Disciplined. Atlas remained perfectly still. Only the slow movement of his nose betrayed that he was reading the night air. One truck horn sounded once. Short. Deliberate. The middle vehicle backed away first. Then all three trucks disappeared into the darkness as quietly as they had arrived. Within seconds, only drifting dust remained. Grace stared after them. "That's it?" Cole didn't answer. He waited another full minute, then another. Only after the forest settled back into its normal rhythm did he stand. They weren't here to attack. They were confirming. Confirming what? That we're still here. They returned to the workshop. Grace reopened the laptop. "I copied everything onto 2 encrypted drives while you were watching outside." She held up 2 identical flash drives. "If something happens to one, the evidence survives." Cole nodded. Harold would have approved. Grace continued exploring the folders stored on the hard drive. Thousands of files, survey reports, water samples, engineering diagrams. Then one folder caught her attention. Project Sentinel. Inside sat only a single scanned page. Handwritten. Harold's writing. Underneath was a simple sentence. "The bank holds only part of the inheritance." Grace frowned. What does that mean? Cole remembered something else from the letter. Nothing here is accidental. He looked slowly around the workshop. Every tool hung precisely where it belonged. Every cabinet closed. Every shelf organized. Harold had spent decades arranging this place. If he'd hidden another clue, it would be somewhere obvious enough to disappear. Atlas stood, without any command. He walked across the workshop toward the enormous diesel engine suspended from a chain hoist near the center of the building. Unlike before, he didn't sniff the floor. He stared upward. The engine. Cole followed. The massive block hung chest-high, coated in old grease and dust. He circled it once. Nothing unusual. Then he remembered the notebooks. Harold had recorded everything. Every bolt, every repair, every measurement. Cole picked up a flashlight and examined the underside. 9 bolts carried matching layers of rust. One didn't. It looked old, but not original. His pulse slowed. "There you are." Grace stepped beside him. "You found something?" Cole touched the lone bolt with one finger. It was removed. "Recently?" "No. Years ago. But someone wanted it to look untouched." Atlas sat directly beneath the engine, watching. Cole walked to the workbench. Every wrench still hung in its painted outline. He selected one. The size matched perfectly. The first turn resisted, then came loose. Metal scraped softly against metal. One bolt, then another, then another. Grace steadied the heavy oil pan as Cole removed the final fastener. Together they lowered it carefully onto the floor. Empty. Except a tightly wrapped oilcloth package rested inside the hollow engine block. Neither of them spoke. Cole lifted it out with both hands. He peeled back the stained cloth. Inside rested a flat steel lockbox, no larger than a legal briefcase. No markings, no labels, only a brass key taped neatly to the top. Grace whispered, "Harold." Cole inserted the key. The lock clicked open. Inside lay rows of neatly organized documents. Bearer bonds, government securities, trust agreements, property records, several sealed envelopes. Everything looked untouched. Grace picked up the first document. Her eyes widened. "This can't be right." Cole looked over her shoulder. The heading read, "Bitterroot Watershed Preservation Trust Estimated Asset Value $49,873,412. Grace turned page after page. The trust owned conservation easements, long-term investments, water rights, protected land. Its total value approached $50 million. Cole remained silent. Grace finally looked at him. You didn't inherit $50 million. He frowned. No. You inherited responsibility. She handed him the final document. Harold's signature appeared beside one final condition. The trustee shall preserve the Bitterroot Aquifer for future generations. Trust assets may not be distributed for personal enrichment. Funds are to be used solely for watershed protection, community restoration, veteran rehabilitation, agricultural preservation, and educational purposes. Cole read the last paragraph twice. The money had never been meant to make him rich. It had been meant to make sure no one could ever buy the valley. Harold hadn't left him a fortune. He had handed him a mission. Atlas quietly rested his head against Cole's arm. Cole scratched behind the old shepherd's ears without taking his eyes off the papers. I finally understand. Grace smiled faintly. So do I. Then her expression changed. She reached beneath the stack. There are more envelopes. Cole opened the first. Inside lay notarized witness statements. Another contained mineral surveys. Another held copies of deeds. Finally, one thick envelope bore a different inscription. Deliver only if the trust survives. Before Cole could break the seal, Atlas's ears snapped upright. His gaze locked on the workshop's eastern wall. Not outside. Inside. A faint electronic beep echoed somewhere behind the shelves. Grace froze. Did you hear that? Cole had already moved. He didn't rush. Speed made noise. Noise created mistakes. Atlas stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the eastern wall where shelves of old bearings, fan belts, and engine parts stretched nearly to the ceiling. Another beep. Soft, regular, every 3 seconds. Cole swept the flashlight beam across the shelves. Nothing. He lowered it immediately. If someone planted something, he whispered, light only tells them we're looking. Grace carefully slid the trust documents back into the steel lockbox. What do? We find it. Atlas walked forward without hesitation. He ignored the lower shelves, ignored the workbench, ignored the hanging tools. Instead, he stopped beside an old electrical junction box, mounted high on a support post. His nose lifted. He sniffed the air rather than the wood. Cole climbed onto a wooden crate. The junction box looked original, its paint faded and chipped. But one screw wasn't. Fresh. Phillips head. Every other screw was a flat head installed decades earlier. He removed it carefully. The cover swung open. Inside, tucked behind disconnected wiring, rested a thumb-sized electronic transmitter. A tiny green light blinked. Beep, beep, beep. Grace stared at it. They've been listening. For how long? Cole looked around the workshop. Long enough. He removed the battery instead of crushing the device. The blinking stopped. Silence returned. They know we found something, Grace said quietly. They know more than that. Cole slipped the transmitter into a cloth pouch. They know we're still here. Atlas suddenly walked toward the front entrance. Not alarmed, focused. Cole followed. Fresh tire tracks crossed the gravel again. Only one vehicle this time. It hadn't entered the property. It had stopped just outside the gate. Someone had approached on foot. Cole found the boot prints immediately. Large, deep, military-style hiking boots. The tracks circled the barn once before disappearing back toward the road. Reconnaissance. Not vandalism, someone had been studying them. The following morning arrived beneath low gray clouds. Grace spread maps across Harold's workbench while Cole brewed coffee over a small camp stove. Atlas lay near the open door, watching the valley. Every few minutes, his ears rotated toward distant sounds invisible to human senses. Grace looked up from the papers. "I spent half the night reading the trust documents." "And?" "Harold designed this brilliantly." She tapped one page. "The money can't simply be withdrawn." Cole raised an eyebrow. "The trustee has authority only after signing conservation agreements with the county and establishing a community board, so nobody can steal it." "Exactly." She smiled. "He built safeguards even against the heir." Cole nodded slowly. "Sounds like him." She opened another folder. "The trust owns water rights beneath nearly 12,000 acres." Cole whistled softly. "That's why they kept coming." "Yes. They weren't buying a barn. They were buying control." Before either could continue, the rumble of engines echoed through the valley. Atlas was on his feet instantly. This time he growled. 3 black SUVs rolled through the front gate. No logos, no company markings. They stopped 20 yards away. 4 men stepped out. One wore an expensive charcoal coat despite the mountain mud. He smiled politely. "Mr. Bennett." Cole remained beside the doorway. "Can I help you?" "My name is Victor Sloan. I represent investors with an interest in your property." Cole didn't answer. Victor removed a folded document. "I understand previous negotiations have been unsuccessful. We'd like to avoid unnecessary conflict." Grace quietly stepped beside Cole. Victor noticed her. "Ms. Holloway." His smile widened. "I suspected you'd become involved." "You've been busy," Grace replied. "So have you." Victor looked back at Cole. "My clients have authorized a revised offer." He named a figure, $2 million. The valley seemed to fall silent. Even Grace blinked. Victor continued calmly. "You keep your truck. You keep whatever personal belongings you've found. You walk away today. No lawsuits, no publicity, no complications." Cole studied the man's face. No anger, no desperation, just confidence. The confidence of someone accustomed to buying whatever stood in his way. Atlas stepped in front of Cole, not aggressively, protectively. Victor noticed. Beautiful dog. He'd be safer somewhere else. Cole's eyes hardened. So would you. For the first time, Victor's smile disappeared. "I don't think you understand what you're standing on." Cole answered evenly. "I don't think you expected me to." Victor folded the offer without another word. "You'll change your mind. I've seen harder men than you change theirs." He returned to his SUV. Within moments, the convoy disappeared down the mountain road. Grace exhaled slowly. "They're escalating." Cole watched the dust settle. "No. They're running out of time." That evening, the sky turned the color of old steel. Wind swept through the pines with growing force. Cole reinforced loose shutters around the barn while Atlas patrolled the property line. The old shepherd suddenly stopped. His body became rigid, not toward the road, toward the western ridge. Cole followed his gaze through binoculars. A brief flash, glass reflecting sunlight. Another observer. High ground. Perfect line of sight to the barn. Whoever it was lowered the optics before Cole could identify them. The figure disappeared into the trees. "They're watching again," Grace said quietly. Cole lowered the binoculars. "They've never stopped." Night settled quickly. Rain began tapping against the roof. Atlas refused to come inside. He remained beneath the porch roof facing the darkness. An hour later, he barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Cole opened the door. Atlas wasn't looking toward the road. He was staring at the truck. Cole's old Ford. Its headlights suddenly flashed, all by themselves. Cole threw one arm across Grace's chest. "Stay back." Atlas was already between them and the truck, his body low, ears pinned forward. He didn't charge. He waited. Rain drummed against the metal roof of the barn. The headlights blinked again. Once, twice, then everything went dark. Cole didn't move. The old pickup sat 30 yards away, exactly where he'd parked it before sunset. Nothing else stirred in the clearing. "Could it be the battery?" Grace whispered. Cole shook his head. "The battery's weak. It couldn't cycle the lights by itself." He crouched behind a stack of split firewood and studied the truck through the rain. No silhouettes. No movement inside. Atlas glanced back once, waiting for permission. "Easy," Cole murmured. The shepherd advanced a few cautious steps, stopping every few feet to test the air. His nose lifted toward the truck, then toward the tree line beyond it. Not the truck. Something behind it. Cole noticed the change immediately. His attention shifted past the pickup. The woods. Dark. Silent. Too silent. He picked up his binoculars from the porch. Rain blurred the lenses, but after wiping them with his sleeve, he caught a faint reflection deep among the pines. Glass. Someone watching. The reflection vanished. "They're out there," Cole said quietly. Grace looked into the darkness but saw nothing. "You can actually tell? They're patient. So are we." He reached the truck slowly, approaching from the passenger side instead of directly from the front. Atlas mirrored him, circling wide to cover the opposite angle. Old habits. Never give an unknown threat a predictable path. Cole opened the passenger door. Nothing. No wires. No package. No broken glass. He leaned inside. The steering column looked untouched. Then he noticed a folded envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Plain white. No stamp. Only one word. Cole. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he scanned the surrounding ground with his flashlight angled low. Fresh boot prints. One person. Approached. Left the envelope. Walked away. No signs of panic. No running. Whoever had done it wanted to be seen eventually. Back inside the barn, Grace placed the envelope on Harold's workbench. "You think it's from Stone Ridge?" "I don't know." Cole slipped on a pair of mechanic's gloves before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. "You are protecting the wrong secret. Ask yourself why Harold never trusted the county. The danger isn't only outside the valley, nothing else." Grace read it twice. It could be an attempt to divide us. It could. It could also be true. Cole folded the page. Either way, someone walked within 20 feet of us tonight. Atlas suddenly walked toward the workshop door. This time there was no growl, only expectation. He stopped beside the rain barrel beneath the roofline. Cole followed. Floating in the water was something wrapped in clear plastic. He reached in and pulled it free. A weatherproof memory card. Grace frowned. That wasn't there this afternoon. Cole dried it carefully with a shop towel. So whoever left the letter left this too. Grace slid it into her laptop. The first images appeared almost immediately. Trail camera footage, the same camera Cole had removed from the pine tree. Dozens of clips. Weeks of recordings. Harold repairing equipment. Surveyors driving past. Stone Ridge vehicles stopping outside the gate. Then newer footage. The day after Harold's funeral. Several men entered the barn while it still legally belonged to the estate. They searched every cabinet, every drawer, every shelf. One man kicked over an old stool in frustration. Another pointed toward the office. Grace froze the frame. I know him. Cole looked closer. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low, but his face remained visible. Who is he? His name is Martin Ellis. He used to work as a senior environmental consultant. For Stone Ridge? Grace nodded slowly. He resigned 3 years ago. Officially. She enlarged the image. Martin wasn't searching randomly. He kept returning to one specific wall inside the office, almost as though he already knew where something had once been hidden. The next video clip carried a timestamp from only 6 nights earlier. A different man. Dressed in dark clothing. He climbed through the office window, exactly the same window Cole had found open. He searched for 12 minutes, then left empty-handed. Grace looked up. They've been chasing Harold's evidence for a long time. They never found it. Cole rested one hand on the steel lockbox, because he stayed one step ahead. Rain continued falling outside. The workshop felt warmer now, no longer just an abandoned building, but a place filled with voices from the past. Harold's notes, Harold's maps, Harold's stubborn determination. Cole glanced around at the orderly rows of tools. He finally understood why nothing had been left to chance. Harold hadn't organized the barn because he liked neatness. He had organized it so anything was out of place would immediately reveal an intruder. A mechanic's habit had become a sentry's system. Grace closed the laptop. We should contact the sheriff. Cole considered it, then slowly shook his head. Not yet. The anonymous note mentioned the county. You think someone inside local government could be involved? I don't know. But until I know who Harold trusted, I'm not handing over the only evidence we have. Atlas, who had been lying quietly near the doorway, lifted his head. A vehicle approached. Not fast. Not cautiously. Confidently. Its headlights swept across the rain-soaked clearing before stopping outside the barn. A single truck door opened. Then a familiar voice called through the storm. Cole? It's Martha, the diner owner. I think you need to see what she brought. Cole opened the barn door. Rain soaked the gravel, turning the clearing into a mirror of dark clouds and headlights. Martha stepped from her aging pickup with a canvas box cradled carefully in both hands. She looked smaller than Cole remembered from the diner, but there was nothing uncertain in the way she walked toward him. Atlas approached first. He sniffed her hand once, then gently leaned against her leg. Good boy, Martha whispered. You remember me. Cole noticed she wasn't surprised to find Grace there. Instead, she glanced toward the open workshop. So, she said softly, Harold finally got you here. Cole exchanged a quick look with Grace. You knew my uncle well? Martha smiled with tired eyes. Everyone worth knowing did. She stepped inside the barn and carefully placed the canvas box on the workbench. I almost burned these. Cole frowned. They've been sitting in my attic for nearly 15 years. She untied the weathered straps. Inside were dozens of old photographs, cassette tapes, newspaper clippings, and several leather-bound journals wrapped in wax paper. Grace carefully lifted one journal. The cover bore a faded name. Samuel Rhodes. I know that name, Grace said. He was the county's chief ranger, Martha replied. He and Harold were inseparable. Cole opened the first journal. The entries weren't personal. They documented creek levels, wildlife migration, illegal drilling activity, and unusual truck traffic deep inside the Bitterroot backcountry. Every page was dated, every observation precise. Martha nodded toward the notebooks. When Samuel died, Harold asked me to keep those if anything ever happened. I asked why, he said. Her voice softened. One day my nephew will come. If he asks questions instead of taking money, give him everything. Cole slowly closed the journal. He knew. He always knew, Martha answered. Rain continued tapping against the roof. The familiar rhythm filled the silence. Grace spread several photographs across the workbench. One showed Harold standing beside an old drilling rig. Another captured a line of tanker trucks parked deep in the mountains years before Stone Ridge officially purchased land nearby. Then one photograph stopped everyone. Harold, Samuel, 3 ranchers, 2 women, several teenagers, all standing inside this very barn. Behind them hung a freshly painted wooden sign. Bitterroot Water Alliance. Grace looked up. This wasn't one man. No, Martha replied. It never was. She pointed toward the faces. Every one of them tried warning the county. What happened? People stopped listening. Some got threatened, some got bought. Some just got tired. She gently touched Harold's face in the photograph. But Harold never quit. Atlas walked to the edge of the workbench and quietly rested his chin beside the old picture. Martha smiled sadly. He loved dogs. He said they judged character better than people. Cole scratched behind Atlas's ears. I believe that. Another truck arrived outside. This time nobody reached for cover. An elderly man wearing a soaked canvas jacket stepped through the doorway carrying a dented coffee thermos. Hank, Martha said. The hardware store owner removed his cap. I figured Harold's shop could use coffee again. He placed the thermos beside the journals, then reached into his coat and removed an envelope. I've been keeping this since the funeral. He handed it to Cole. My conscience finally won. Inside lay copies of invoices, equipment purchases, replacement pump parts, special drilling bits. Every receipt linked to shell companies that Grace immediately recognized. They hid everything through subcontractors. Hank nodded. Harold asked me to copy every order. I never understood why. Guess I do now. Before anyone could respond, another pair of headlights appeared outside. Then another. Cole instinctively turned toward the door. Old reflex. Atlas noticed before anyone else. The shepherd didn't growl. He wagged his tail once. A rancher stepped inside carrying an old video camera. Behind him came a retired oil field mechanic. Then a former Forest Service employee. None of them spoke immediately. They simply looked around the barn, around Harold's workbench, around the tools hanging exactly where he'd left them. Finally, the retired mechanic broke the silence. I figured if the kid finally came, Harold was right. One by one, they placed items onto the workbench. An old VHS tape, survey maps, photographs, maintenance logs, a faded cassette recorder. Each object represented another piece of the story Harold had spent years assembling. Grace stared at the growing pile. This is incredible. The former ranger shook his head. No. This is a town paying an old debt. Cole looked around the workshop. Yesterday it had felt abandoned. Tonight voices filled every corner. Coffee steamed from paper cups. Rain drummed overhead. Neighbors exchanged memories about Harold fixing tractors long after midnight, repairing broken wells without charging families, and showing teenagers how to rebuild engines when they had nowhere else to go. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Cole didn't feel like an outsider sitting in the room. He felt like he belonged. Martha quietly walked beside him. He'd be proud. Cole looked toward the workbench where strangers had become allies. I barely knew him. You know him now. She smiled. Every person standing here is part of his story, and now, they're part of yours. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. He walked toward the rear wall of the workshop, not hurried, curious. He sniffed beneath one of Harold's tool cabinets, then pawed once. Cole crouched beside him. Taped underneath the cabinet was a small black plastic box, no larger than a deck of cards. A tiny antenna protruded from one side. Grace's expression hardened. "Don't touch it." Cole examined it without moving. No battery compartment. No recording light. "It transmits." Grace nodded slowly. "They've been listening." From inside Harold's barn. The room fell completely silent. Every eye turned toward the tiny device. Someone had known what was said inside this workshop, long before Cole ever arrived. No one reached for the transmitter. The tiny black device sat beneath Harold's tool cabinet, like a poisonous spider waiting to be noticed. Grace crouched beside it without touching it. They didn't install this yesterday. Cole studied the mounting tape. The adhesive had yellowed with age. Months. Grace nodded. Maybe longer. Hank slowly removed his cap. Harold knew. Everyone looked at him. The old hardware store owner folded his weathered hands. "He told me once that if strangers suddenly stopped asking questions, it meant they already had the answers." Cole glanced around the workshop. Every face reflected the same realization. Harold hadn't been fighting only lawsuits. He had been living under surveillance. Atlas stepped between the group and the transmitter, quietly blocking the area with his body. The old shepherd wasn't growling. He simply refused to let anyone get closer. Cole understood. "Leave it." Grace looked up. "You want them to think we never found it." "Exactly." He stood and lowered his voice. "From now on, nothing important gets discussed inside this barn." The room fell silent. Then Martha smiled. "Harold would have liked you." The following morning, sunlight broke through the storm clouds for the first time in days. Mist floated above the valley, while the mountains slowly emerged from the fading fog. Grace drove into Hamilton before sunrise. By noon, she returned carrying several heavy archive boxes. She spread legal documents across Harold's workbench. "I filed emergency preservation notices this morning." Cole looked up. "Already?" "They're temporary. But if Stone Ridge touches this property now, they'll answer to a judge." She handed Cole another folder. The Attorney General's Environmental Division agreed to review Harold's reports. "They actually listened?" "They listened because of this." She tapped the hard drive. "And because Harold documented everything." Cole slowly nodded. Years in special forces had taught him that information won battles long before anyone fired a shot. Harold had understood the same principle. Different battlefield. Same strategy. 3 days later, the county courthouse overflowed with reporters. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. An aging mechanic's barn. A decorated green beret. A mysterious environmental trust. People came looking for scandal. Instead, they found evidence. Stone Ridge Energy arrived with an army of attorneys. Dark suits, perfect smiles, boxes of paperwork. Victor Sloan walked through the courthouse doors as confidently as ever. He stopped only long enough to look directly at Cole. "This doesn't have to become public," Cole answered quietly. "It already is." Inside the hearing room, cameras were prohibited, but journalists packed every available seat. The county commissioner opened the proceedings. Grace stood first. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. She simply placed Harold's journals onto the evidence table one after another. Field notebooks, water analyses, survey maps, the trust agreement. Finally, the hard drive. Each item landed with a soft, unmistakable sound. Truth didn't need theatrics. Victor Sloan rose next. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "Mr. Bennett is a decorated veteran. We thank him for his service. But military service alone does not qualify someone to interpret geological data. Several heads nodded. Victor continued. Our company sympathizes with Mr. Bennett. We also recognize he struggles with documented combat trauma. Grace didn't interrupt. Neither did Cole. Victor looked directly toward the commissioners. PTSD can affect memory. It can influence perception. It can lead people to see patterns that simply... A sharp voice interrupted him. That's enough. Everyone turned. An elderly man stood slowly from the last row. Gray hair, cane, expensive suit that no longer quite fit. Victor's face drained of color. Mr. Harlan? Grace whispered. Oh my God. Cole leaned closer. Who is he? She answered without taking her eyes off the man, former vice president of Stone Ridge. The old executive walked carefully toward the witness stand. I'd like to testify. Victor objected immediately. My client was not listed. The commissioner raised one hand. You'll have your turn. The old man settled into the chair. His hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from age. My name is Thomas Harlan. I served as Vice President of Resource Development for Stone Ridge Energy for 14 years. Silence settled over the courtroom. He removed a thick envelope from his briefcase. I resigned 18 months ago. Not because I wanted to retire, because I couldn't keep lying. Victor closed his eyes. Harlan continued. Everything Harold Bennett documented is true. A wave of whispers swept through the room. He opened the envelope. Inside were board meeting minutes, executive emails, financial projections, signed approvals. They knew the aquifer existed. They knew large-scale extraction would permanently reduce groundwater across the Bitterroot Valley. They discussed it repeatedly. He looked directly toward the commissioners. They calculated the environmental damage. They calculated the lawsuits. And they calculated the profits. Grace quietly accepted the documents. Victor no longer looked toward the audience. He stared only at the table in front of him. Harlan's voice softened. I met Harold Bennett once. He offered me coffee. He told me there were still people worth protecting. I laughed at him. The old man paused. I've regretted that conversation every day since. The hearing continued for hours. Hydrologists confirmed Harold's research. Survey records matched the trust documents. Satellite images aligned with drilling permits. Every piece fit. Not because one witness told a convincing story, because hundreds of separate facts pointed toward the same truth. By late afternoon, the commissioner announced a temporary injunction. All Stone Ridge activity within the watershed ceased immediately pending state investigation. Reporters rushed from the room. Phones rang endlessly. Outside the courthouse, cameras surrounded Grace. She simply pointed toward Cole. He isn't the hero of this story. She smiled. Harold Bennett is. Cole walked quietly down the courthouse steps. Atlas waited beside the truck exactly where he'd left him. The old shepherd stood, wagged his tail once, then rested his head against Cole's chest. For the first time in years, Cole didn't hear helicopters. He didn't scan rooftops. He didn't search for exits. He simply stood there with his oldest friend. Then Atlas suddenly stiffened. His nose lifted toward the parking lot. Across the street. A familiar black SUV slowly pulled away. Watching. Waiting. The fight wasn't over yet. Cole watched the black SUV disappear into afternoon traffic until it became another shadow among many. Atlas never took his eyes off the intersection. Only when the vehicle was completely gone did the old shepherd relax and sit beside the truck. Grace closed the courthouse door behind them. They're finished legally, she said. Cole shook his head. Companies don't spend this much money unless they believe they can still win. Grace smiled faintly. That's exactly what Harold used to say. The weeks that followed were filled with more paperwork than Cole had imagined possible. State investigators arrived in Bitterroot. Hydrologists drilled independent test wells. Environmental scientists verified Harold's decades of records. Every report confirmed the same conclusion. The aquifer beneath the valley was one of the cleanest and most significant groundwater reserves in the region. Within 2 months, the state issued a permanent conservation order protecting the watershed. Stone Ridge Energy appealed. Lost. Appealed again. Lost again. Federal investigators expanded the inquiry after reviewing the internal documents Thomas Harlan had surrendered. Several executives resigned before formal charges were ever considered. Others quietly disappeared from public view. One crisp October morning, Grace pulled into the barn carrying a thick leather folder. She found Cole replacing broken boards along the western wall, while Atlas slept nearby beneath a patch of warm sunlight. "You've got good timing," Cole said, setting down his hammer. "I hope so." She handed him the folder. "It's finished." He opened it. Inside lay the final court order. The Bitterroot Watershed Preservation Trust had officially transferred into active operation. Cole Bennett had been confirmed as its first managing trustee. The conservation easements were permanent. The funds could finally be used, not for luxury, not for personal wealth, for the valley, for its people, for its future. Cole closed the folder. "I wish Harold could have seen this." Grace looked around the old workshop. "I think he did." Winter arrived early that year. Snow gathered along fence posts and settled softly across the roof Harold had spent years patching. The barn no longer stood empty. Volunteers arrived every weekend. Hank rebuilt broken workbenches. Martha organized the office. The retired mechanic taught local teenagers how to rebuild carburetors. The former ranger helped restore the trails leading to the springs Harold had protected for decades. Cole worked beside them every day. No speeches, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Just steady hands rebuilding something worth keeping. Atlas greeted every visitor personally. He walked slowly now. The scar on his shoulder had healed, though a streak of silver had spread across his muzzle. Children always stopped to pet him before entering the workshop. He accepted every gentle hand with quiet dignity. One afternoon, a young Marine veteran named Ethan arrived carrying nothing but a backpack. He had been sleeping in his truck. Cole recognized the distant look in his eyes immediately. No explanation was necessary. He simply handed Ethan a pair of work gloves. "Ever rebuilt an engine?" The young man shook his head. Cole smiled. "Good. We'll learn together." That became the beginning. Word spread. Veterans came looking for work. High school students came looking for skills. Retired ranchers came looking for purpose after selling their cattle. The old barn slowly filled with sounds it hadn't heard in years. The steady rhythm of hammers, the hum of welding torches, laughter, conversation, life. A new wooden sign appeared above the entrance. Bennett Mountain Workshop. Underneath, carved into the cedar by hand, were 6 smaller words. Repair machines. Restore people. Protect home. The first spring after the legal battle, Grace stopped by with coffee before driving back to Missoula. She found Cole alone in Harold's old office. He was organizing the final stack of journals before placing them inside a glass display case. "Looks different," she said. Cole glanced around. The office walls had been repaired. Fresh windows overlooked the valley. Harold's workbench remained exactly where it had always stood. "It still feels like his place." Grace smiled. "I hope it always does." As she turned to leave, Cole noticed one narrow drawer in the old desk that still resisted when pulled. He frowned. I don't remember opening this one. The wood stuck before finally sliding free. Inside rested only a single folded envelope. No seal, no stamp. Just one familiar line written across the front. For the day the hammers return. Cole unfolded the letter carefully. Harold's handwriting looked steadier than ever. Cole. If you're reading this, then I guessed correctly. The barn is alive again. Not because of the timber, not because of the land, because people came back. If that happened, then you already understand something I spent my entire life trying to learn. Money protects a place. People give it meaning. The trust was never my greatest inheritance. Neither was the workshop. The real inheritance was hope. Hope that one person can refuse to quit. Hope that neighbors still matter. Hope that a broken life can still become useful. If there are young hands learning honest work where old engines once gathered dust, then we've already won. Thank you for coming home. Harold. Cole lowered the letter. Outside the office window, sunlight poured through the open barn doors. Atlas lay near the entrance while two teenagers struggled to lift an old tractor hood. Instead of stepping in, the old shepherd watched patiently until one of the retired mechanics walked over to help them. Nobody hurried. Nobody argued. Everyone belonged. Cole folded Harold's letter and placed it inside the top drawer of the desk. Not hidden. Not locked away. Simply waiting. He stepped back into the workshop. Someone laughed. A hammer struck steel. An old country song drifted softly from a radio near the workbench. Atlas lifted his head, saw Cole, and slowly rose to his feet. For a brief moment, Cole caught himself looking toward the doors. Searching. Measuring. Old instincts. Then he stopped. There was no need. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled at Atlas. The old shepherd crossed the workshop and leaned gently against his leg. Cole rested one hand on the dog's neck. Years earlier, he had arrived believing he had inherited nothing more than a collapsing barn. Instead, he had inherited a promise, a purpose, a community, and a place that had been waiting for him long before he knew he was lost. Outside, clear mountain water continued its silent journey beneath the Bitterroot Valley, protected not by fortune alone, but by the people who finally understood its worth. The barn that everyone had mocked stood stronger than ever, not because it had been rebuilt, because the lives inside it had been. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you. Here's something simple. Just comment 1 if you believe a loyal dog can change a person's life, or comment 0 if you believe second chances come from the people who refuse to give up. I read as many comments as I can, and I truly enjoy seeing where you're watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and join our community. There are many more stories waiting for you. Stories about courage, loyalty, family, and ordinary people who discover extraordinary strength when life gives them one last chance. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the value of something the rest of the world has forgotten.